In the pending global reset, left brain jobs will be wiped out by Google, robots, and outsourcing. The antidote is the unoutsourceable superpower of the flow state. Welcome to What the Flow, where we discuss making money easier, connecting deeper, and creating your own luck. And WTF, why we numb out, sabotage, and play small, and how to change it. It's Flow Time with Tony.
WTF. Welcome to the What the Flow podcast. This is Tony Litzer. Excited you've joined me today. In today's episode, we're talking not about what the flow, but the WTF. What the WTF when life throws a curveball at us and what we do about it, how we face it, how we address it, how we adapt. And I'm talking about that. I'm actually, for those of you that are not watching this on YouTube, I'm recording this from my parents' basement. And I'm in the game room here. And you can see my suitcase on the floor and then my little twin-size bed I tucked underneath the basketball game. As if you haven't watched episode number 1, my family had a little crisis in a family business that we've run for, I think it's well over 25 years, maybe longer than that, when a bunch of them showed up for work on Monday morning and a family member had secretly sold the company and fired all the family members. And so I jumped on a plane and came down here, and we've been spending 20-hour days building a new business over the last several days. And it's fitting as far as like this topic of what do you do when life hands you a situation. I told the story about the bears that climbed over the fence of my enclosure and ate one of my goats, drug it off into the woods, and really enjoyed it the other night. Like, what do we do when life hits us like that? What do we do when things don't show up or don't end up or don't happen the way we want to? And there's so many areas of life where we have high expectations and we invest a lot of energy. And this is when it really hurts. In relationships, when we have really made ourselves vulnerable and we've opened ourselves to another human being, or we've invested a lot in another human being, and then we find out that that human being isn't who we thought they were. And this is it's interesting because we have these high expectations for other people, and they never will live up to our expectations. But like when we're betrayed in a significant way. I had a person that I had helped a lot, at least in my estimation, for really been supportive of a person, and I found out that they had really set things up to try and cheat me, and it hurt. It hit deep, and it was like, how? Like, that person, really? And so this stuff happens, and the idea is like this concept of flow and a flow state is not that we're going to reach some nirvana, some airy-fairy spiritual idea that we're going to not have any problems in our life. It's what do we do as life changes and life adapts? I heard this quote once. Wayne Dyer had quoted this, some Indian guru, and he said, "In my world, nothing ever goes wrong." And I remember hearing that, 18 years ago or something, and I'm like, what the hell? What do you mean? Nobody dies? Like, nobody gets sick? Like, you don't ever have a money problem? Like, your body doesn't ever feel, like bad, or you don't ever have conflict in your relationships? Like, what do you mean in your world nothing ever goes wrong? There's never like a natural disaster where you live? Like, this is crazy talk. And, and it took me 18 years to realize in his world, nothing ever went wrong because of his story about what was happening. And as we move into the next decade, change is happening so fast. Change in like in marketplaces, in finances, in the economies, in all kinds of things that are happening in the world, in the paradigm of humanity. I mean, think about how things have changed in relation to jobs that people have. Think about how the worldview has changed around sex and sexuality. Think about how the worldview has changed around, how people express themselves through social media and through all these other mediums that weren't available before. It's changing so fast. And so generally our response to this kind of disruption is fight or flight or freeze. Right? So that's what people tend to do. And as we move forward, one of the most important skills that I think that we need to have is the ability to adapt quickly. particularly, not just situationally, right? So in our case, literally like within minutes of me realizing what had happened, I had purchased a plane ticket and I started packing my bag and headed to the airport so that I could come to the city and support my family. And it's not because I'm getting paid to do this, it's because this is what we do in our tribe. And I was talking to my 7-year-old daughter and she says, "Daddy, when are you coming home?" And I said, "I don't know. I bought a one-way ticket. I'm coming home when this is done." That's quick adapting. You know, we had a business set up within 24 hours. We had clients, you know, that were joining into that business within 24 hours. So we adapted really, really quickly. We created, they're actually upstairs. You probably hear them walking around. I hear people arriving now. But we're working until 2 o'clock in the morning. We've created an office out of my parents' living room upstairs. And, you know, there's some beautiful things that have come about because of the relationships that we have. You know, people have shown up and brought business supplies. Like one guy that we were good friends with, he heard about this. He's like, "This is bullshit." And he works for a business supply store. And he showed up with this great big copy machine. He's like, "I got you guys hooked up." Another guy showed up and he said, "Look, I have 100 clients that match the profile of what you guys need. I'm going to recommend all of them come to you." But this happens because of the relationships that we've developed over years. So that is one way of adapting. That is one way of dealing with the WTF, right? But what I want to talk about is, in this particular podcast, is not the logistical steps of, okay, the shit hit the fan. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to start that business? How are you going to change your finances? How are you going to do whatever it is? How are you going to get that new job? Whatever it is you need to do, how are you going to adapt in that relationship? Those are all strategic. But I think that the thing that's the most important is that we learn to adapt our story about ourselves. Now, what does that mean? I'll give you an example. Like, you know this, I like telling stories. So I had become a real estate investor and I started teaching seminars on how to buy and sell real estate. And a lot of the driver of those seminars, for me personally, I liked helping people, but I also got so much validation that I was somebody important because I was up in front of the room and these people were asking me questions and I had this deep insecurity in who I was as a human being. I was raised in the place that had a lot of shame. And when someone is raised in a shame-based culture, the shame-based culture says, you're not good enough unless you act this way, unless you look this way, unless you behave this way, unless you perform this way. And it's always a standard that's impossible. And so the person that's being shamed tends to take on a belief system that says, I don't measure up. No matter how successful I get, no matter how much I achieve, it's never quite enough. And so that was what I had going on. And so when the real estate markets changed in 2008 and the seminar markets dried up, I went from having, I was cash flowing like $50,000 a month from the speaking business, and I had my real estate, had hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity, I owned millions of dollars worth of properties, and all of a sudden I had no cash flow and I was hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole on these properties. And I had no idea what to do next. I didn't know what I was going to do to make a living. I had 4 kids at the time, and it was this terrifying experience. But it wasn't the logistics that were really the problem. The real problem is that my identity went into hiding. All of a sudden, my inner story was like, oh, well, I always felt like maybe I was just a fraud, like I didn't quite measure up, I wasn't good enough. That's that shame-based upbringing that says no matter what you do, it's not enough. And so what was happening to me fit my core identity and my core belief that I wasn't enough, that I didn't measure up, that if you really knew me and you really knew all the shit and the storms and the noise and the chaos and the behaviors and all these different things that I shamed myself for, then you wouldn't listen to me, you wouldn't love me. And that's how I felt about me. It really wasn't about other people. It was, I didn't measure up for me. And so in the midst of the crisis, rather than adapt, which I could have done, I look back at it, there was 100 different directions I could have gone. Instead, I froze and I went into hiding because my inner world didn't adapt to an identity of someone with a failed business. My inner world needed to be propped up by a successful business. My inner world needed to be propped up by fancy cars or houses or toys or trips or some kind of recognition, like these external things that I thought if I could get those, I'll finally feel good about me. And so as it collapsed, what collapsed with it was my story about myself. And I went into this place of an inability to perform. And so, but I had to, so I started some more businesses. I did some different things. And I had business after business that I started would fail. And I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what was going on. And now, I have a decade to look back at that and go, oh, of course. Of course, because my core belief about myself was that I was unworthy and that I was unlovable and that I wasn't actually successful or wasn't able to be successful. And the reality is that, I've got a lot of time since then to contemplate this, and I've mentored thousands of people in business and helped them in their businesses, setting up their marketing and setting up their teams and their communication and their different challenges that they face. And I don't know of a business that doesn't face all kinds of crazy circumstances. I don't know of a business owner that doesn't have more failed ideas than successful ideas. But at the time, nobody had told me this. No one had explained this to me, that if you want to get into this game, you're going to have to fail a lot, and that's okay and there's nothing wrong with it. So the thing that I want to really bring to your attention in this podcast is what has to adapt is our story about ourself. And we have to have a dynamic, flexible story about who we are as a human being that allows for us to screw things up. When the WTF hits, when it happens, because it's going to happen on some level, like there's going to be disruption and changes and all kinds of things. And so there's this nature of hearing something like this. When I would hear this discussed in the marketplace, I would tighten up inside and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't want there to be change. I don't want this to happen. I don't want people to die. I don't want things to economies or markets or equities to go to change. And I would freeze. And what I'm suggesting to you, that the skill to be in this flow state that I'm talking about, the skill that is required to thrive during chaos and to find opportunity in chaos and find opportunity in change, because that's what's coming, that's what's happening. There's change happening all around us. And when we can adapt our story about ourselves, then we can move about this change and see opportunities and take them and not make failure mean anything about us. When we can approach a relationship and we know that other person may reject us, that other person may choose something else, that other person may betray us and play us and lie to us and cheat us, and they can do all those things to us. And when our story about ourselves is that rather than saying, I am unlovable because this person rejected me, or I'm unlovable because I made this choice that didn't honor that person. I'm not lovable because I screwed up this business, or I lost this job, or I invested money somewhere and it didn't work out, or I'm not able to get ahead, or I'm not able to make enough money. When we change that story into a story that says, I'm a one-of-a-kind creation of this universe. I'll only be here one time in this expression. I have this limited amount of space and time and consciousness to express who I am and how I feel that I am, and that's worth celebrating. And I'm going to make good choices, and I'm going to make ridiculously stupid choices, and I'm going to do things to try to make myself feel a certain way, to try to meet a need, and sometimes those things aren't going to serve me in the long run. And I'm going to do some things that are amazing. I'm going to have kindness towards other human beings, and I'm going to hurt other human beings. And this is the journey of being human, and I'm not going to make the journey wrong. I'm going to begin to look at things and say, in my world, nothing ever goes wrong. Now, this is a stretch. Oh, that one is so crazy. Like taking that on and really actually believing this. When I wanted to share a message. This is years after all the real estate things. And I was up in the mountains one day reading this book, and I had this moment. I'll tell the story sometime in the full story. But I had like this electrifying moment while I was in this hammock up at 10,000 feet at this high mountain lake, of this knowing, this certainty that there was this clarity of something I wanted to do, this message I wanted to share. And so I came down out of the mountains, and I decided to go big with it. And I went and I hired a camera crew to go with me to the Dominican Republic. And we filmed this like crazy series of videos. The first video, I'm sitting backwards on a motorcycle, driving it through traffic in a third world country. And I'm teaching, sitting backwards on a motorcycle. The car with the camera followed me through the streets. In the second video, I'm driving a dune buggy through the streets. In the third video, I'm walking on the railing of this bridge like 30 feet over the ocean, and I'm like right on the edge of the railing, and I walk and I teach while I'm walking on this thing, and then I jump off at the end of the training, and I did all these things. Like one of them on a zip line. I'm like doing a training. There's a drone that's following me, and I got one of those GoPro cameras, and I'm like, it was an intense video series. It was so fun to shoot, and I got to teach a bunch of things that I was really passionate about. And then I got back, and about a month later, I got in a car accident, and I got a brain injury, and I got hit by a drunk driver, and I couldn't. I talked about this. I couldn't finish my sentences. I couldn't read or write for months. I couldn't do math in my head for like 3 or 4 months. I had to lay down all the time. I basically had about 90 minutes a day that I wasn't dizzy, and so here I had this, 4 kids. I had 5 kids at the time, and I would just I was just hanging on for dear life. It was so chaotic. It was so crazy. And I went to the brain doctor, and he goes, type A and type AAA. He's like referring to me. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, type AAA personalities don't like what I'm about to say. I'm like, okay, I'm ready. He says, this is going to take you 12 to 18 months to get better. And that was about 8 months into it. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work for me. And he goes, yeah, I know you all say the same thing to me. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I have this project that I really feel inspired to create. I got to get it out there. I got to create this thing. I got to finish it. He's like, I know. You all say the same thing to me. And the longer you push, the longer it's going to take you to heal. And I was like, no, this doesn't work. Like I got all these goals. I got these dreams. I got these ambitions. And he goes, yeah. I know. Keep saying that. I just told you how long it's going to take. And ended up taking almost 4 years. And I was sitting with a neurologist, and and this is about a year into it. And I said, look, I'm not mad at the guy that hit me. I have compassion in my life in a way that I just didn't have it. And I really appreciate that compassion. I wouldn't have that compassion were it not for this accident. And I was talking to, she's listening to me and kind of let me process. And I said, but the one thing that's got me is I just feel like my life, this project is a year behind because of this car accident. And I'm really like frustrated. I'm like a year late in my life because of this accident. And she looks at me and she goes, it's interesting. You feel like you had like this purpose to share a message. And it really spoke to you in that moment. And you were so clear about it. I told her the whole story. And she says, why is it so hard for you to just make up the story? If you can make up a story that you have some kind of like thing you got to do, why is it so hard for you not to make up a story that this accident was just part of that, and part of that journey, and part of that message, and part of that sharing? And I remember sitting there on her couch and going, oh, wow. I can either make up a story that my life's a year behind, or I can make up a story just as easily that I'm right on track, and that this whole journey, that whole experience, the whole learning process is actually part of that clarity and that inspiration, that thing that I was creating. And I changed my story, right? It took me like 5 minutes sitting there like contemplating this, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to change my story that this is just right. Now, does it mean that, I was thinking about this, I'm making notes for today's podcast, and it was like, why is it so hard to do that? Because it hurts so freaking bad. Like, why is it so hard to just change our story? Because we want these things. We put our blood and our sweat and our tears and our hopes and our effort and our energy into creating something. And then when it doesn't work, it sucks, right? It's not WTF because it feels good. It's that way because it's difficult and it's challenging. It's like hard to let go of something we've put so much into. We had the org chart for our company up on this poster. I saw it this morning before coming down here. And it has all like the entire organization that we had built. And these weren't just people. These were, and some of them were actually, family members, like blood relatives. But the rest of them were our family. And we're standing there, my dad and I are standing there this morning, and we're looking at the chart. And it was kind of like trying not to cry as we're watching as half the staff has quit. And the others are looking for jobs because of this big disruption that's happened. And these are these people that we love. We spend our time with, we spend our energy with. And it's not easy to accept change. It's not easy to accept situations that are difficult. It's painful. And we are in a time of disruption and change. And if we want to be able to thrive in this kind of chaos, we really have to learn how to adapt really, really quickly. Here's I guess the sort of the closing thought on today's podcast. When you take a look at your life, you take a look at what is, and you look at the parts of it that you like and the parts of it that you don't like, and you look at you within that context. There's always going to be things we don't like. We're never going to get to where our life is just right and it's just the way we want it to be. This is not the nature of things. It's not the nature of humanity and life and those things. But our story about what is can adapt. And this is going to be a skill that you have to develop if you want to thrive in this new world that we live in. A flexible story about yourself. And within that flexibility, like if you look at the things you think aren't good enough about you, this whole idea of, fill in the blanks for you. I'm not good enough because. And so we often have, things about our body that we don't like. I'm not good enough because this is how my body is in the current moment. We do this around relationships. I'm not good enough because maybe I lost that lover, or I don't have that lover, or my relationships are a certain way. Or maybe it's out of choices, right? I'm not good enough because, I screwed this thing up, or I cheated this person, or I did something horrible, or I made a mistake, or I harmed someone. Could be about where we are in our life. Right? This idea that I should be somewhere else. I should be further along than I am now. And so there's all these stories that we have. I'm not good enough because I haven't achieved this thing, or I missed an opportunity, or I wasn't raised the right way, or I had some trauma that happened to me, or there's all these different ways. And you fill in the blanks for you. And you take a look at this, I'm not good enough because thing. And I want you to contemplate something. It's some questions that came from, it's called The Work. And now I really feel bad that I'm spacing her name. I hope it comes to me in a moment. I think these questions were adapted from this thing that she calls The Work. Man, I feel really bad I'm not giving her credit. It'll come to me, and I'll credit her on the next podcast. But it's an adaptation of some questions that I think the person that taught me got it from her. So I wanted to give her credit, and I can't even remember her name because she wasn't actually my teacher. It's the question of asking this. It's saying, is it true? Is it true because my project was a year off, that there was something wrong with my life? And if there's something wrong with my life, it's like digging in and getting into these questions of who am I if my life is off track? And what was interesting is those videos, that whole project never took off. Like, as the time of recording this, I think it's got like 150 views on YouTube. I put like probably $150,000 in with all the different things that were done and all the different pieces that came together. And I just was unable to actually market it because, I had to heal my life. I had to heal my inner world. And so is it true that because that never took off, that I'm not good enough? And so ask yourself this question. So there's these 4 steps I'm going to have you do. The first is you identify the story. Right? The story is, I'm not good enough because whatever, and it becomes an I am statement. So in my case, it was like, growing up, I shamed myself for my sexual choices, right? So just because of the upbringing I had around me that said I was evil, and I was bad, and I was wrong. So it's like, I am unworthy, I am unlovable, I am unclean, I am bad, right? This is the I am statements, right? So like when my business failed, it was, I'm a loser because I screwed up a fantastic business. I sabotaged a fantastic business. Or I'm a loser because I just couldn't hold it together. I'm not worthy to teach or to share or to contribute because I have these failures. Right? So there's these stories, but they became an I am statement. In my relationship with my partner, when I try to reach out and she would reject me, then I would go, oh, I'm not lovable. What's wrong with me? I'm just this piece of shit. Well, I'm not good enough. Because, right? So it becomes an I am statement. So the first step is you identify your I am statement. And the second step is that you ask this question and say, is it true? And when I say true, I mean like true like gravity, right? So if I take my notebook and I drop it, it's going to fall, right? It's true like gravity. Is it true because you're not where you think you ought to be in life? Is it true because your body has too much of this and too little of that? Is it true because your bank account is only where it is? Is it true because your career is where it is? Is it true because your lovers have been who they have been or haven't been who they have been? Is it true that you're not enough as a human being because of those things? Or is it just a story? Is it just a story that you've bought into because enough people on the outside said it, that you said it on the inside? And I'd have you consider that maybe it's just a story. And then the next question is, what would be possible in your world if you had a different story? Don't try to think of what the different story would be yet. Think about possibility. Go to the place of going, how would my body feel differently if I had a different story about it? How would my relationships feel different? How would I show up differently? What would be different in these spaces if I had a different story? How would I show up in business, in money, and in risk taking, and in doing things that I really love, and taking the leap to do something I'm passionate about? How would I show up differently if I had a different story? And contemplate that for a moment. And then this is the fourth question, which is, in order to experience those things that you just detailed, that body, those relationships, that money situation, that purpose, what would my story need to be about me? And this is where I came up with the story about me. Because I could never get my shit together. I could never manage myself in a way that I didn't have shame about some of my choices. I could never get to where my emotions were always happy and pleasant, and avoided the really toxic depression or the toxic anger or the toxic rage or the hatred or the spite or the envy or the jealousy. I could never get to where I didn't have that. I could never figure out from expression of sexuality of a place that didn't involve places that I shamed myself around, or aspects of it just because of the upbringing. I was brought up in this really repressive upbringing, and those voices still ring in my head sometimes. And I couldn't get to where I ever made enough money for it to actually be enough. Even when I made millions of dollars, it just wasn't enough inside. So I realized that this external bullshit game, I couldn't ever get it together enough unless I could change my story. And I looked at this, and that was when I came up with, I am a one-of-a-kind creation of the universe. I'm just here this once. I have this expression this one time, and that this one-of-a-kind expression is worth celebrating. And it's not like in a big ego narcissistic, oh, look at me, I'm a one-of-a-kind creation of the universe. Oh, look. No, because in choosing that story for myself, it caused me to start to see other people that way. Even this family member who has destroyed something that I thought was beautiful. I look at her and I go, well, that's an unfortunate expression. That's an unfortunate way this one-of-a-kind expression of the universe, who has value as a human being, has decided to create so much toxicity and so much damage and create nightmares for so many people. That is an unfortunate thing. And that human being is a one-of-a-kind expression of the universe, and it allows me to see people in their expressions with love and with kindness and with care, because I start seeing myself that way. And so as you move forward, as you want to create more of this flow state in your world, as you want to be flexible in your ability to adapt to situations, the very first step of this process, before you ever try to do any of these steps to get your body in the flow, to get your mind in the flow, to get all these other things in the flow, the very first step is you got to change your story about you. Now, I've created a program. It's a 21-day audio program. I call it Water, Weed, Repeat. It's the process of natural creation, right? In the garden, we water, we weed, and we repeat. It's the same process in our brain. We have to follow these same. We got to take the weeds, take these shitty ideas, take these broken stories. We got to weed them out. Then we got to feed it. We got to water it. We got to add in these new beliefs, following the rules of brain science and the neuroplasticity of the brain, that we can actually recreate neurons in our brain and neural pathways in our brain with a new story if we do this right. So the first four CDs, it's an audio course, but it's downloadable. It used to be CDs when I recorded it. but it's the first 4 of these audios take you through a series of questions and visualization exercises to cause a shift in your story about you. Not on a cognitive level, because this is not a thinker brain thing that we change. We don't change our emotions through thinking about our emotions. We change our emotions by feeling new emotions. And the brain science says it's through emotion that we rewrite the neural pathways in our brain. And so this program takes you through exercises that create the emotional shift, that start to rewrite the neurons in your brain, that start to reinforce this new story about yourself. And if it would be useful to you, I'd like to offer you a gift of the first 4 of the audios of this course to help you on this path of being able to start to rewrite some of these stories about you. So you'll find a link either under the video, or you'll find a link here on the podcast that you can go and you can download those. Just give me your email address and I'll give you a link that you can download them. And you can start to take those steps with this, the ability to have a flexible story about who you are as a human being will give you the ability that when it all crashes down in whatever situation, when there's changes in situations, that you move quickly and you adapt quickly, and then you take the opportunity to create something even better for yourself. Thank you for sharing your time and your consciousness with me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next podcast. In the meantime, create yourself a fantastic day.
If you're ready now to access the superpower of the flow state in your life, download the free mini course to learn the 3 easy steps of Tony's morning ritual. Now go and create some luck.